Hello, everyone. Welcome to another week of distance learning. So before we go on to something new, I'd like to go over what we did last week to review. Last week, I introduced you to the topics of America moving into the West, escaping the confines of the original 13 colonies along the Atlantic coast and moving out towards the Mississippi River and even beyond that. Last week, you were supposed to have watched part 1 and part 2 of the Lewis and Clark documentaries. Each one of those was an hour and 45 minutes long, so that is why I did not post any more of these videos last week. But this week, we're going to be moving right along. I hope all of you watched those videos. I hope all of you learned something. The Lewis and Clark journey is considered one of the greatest journeys ever made by mankind. It's right up there with Marco Polo as a greatest journey ever made by man. Lewis and Clark, along with their guide Sacagawea and the African-American York, traveled over 8,000 miles, saw things that the European and African Americans had never seen before, encountered tribes that had never seen them before, and were the first people to see the Pacific Ocean from the land, or the first European and African Americans to see the Pacific Ocean from the land. So let's review a little bit. So in 1776, there was a population boom, and we went from around 2.5 million people to 75 years later, 23 million people. So our country grew 10 times in 75 years. That is enormous. That would be, there are almost 330 million people today. That would be like going from 300 million people to 300 billion people in your lifetime. So that, or just 3 billion people in your lifetime. That is an amazing number of people. And we have more states. You know, I forgot to put on my timer to make sure you guys aren't here so long and I don't get too long-winded. So the timer's on. And we have more states. The states started, again, at the East Coast and started going westward. Vermont, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, and Illinois. I want you all to find those states on your own on the map right now. Go. Pause the video before you do it. All right, we're going to move on. Alabama, Maine, Missouri, Arkansas, Michigan, Florida, Texas, and Iowa. I'd like you to pause the video right now and find these states. Go. All right. And finally, we have Wisconsin and California. California is the outlier because California is on the West Coast, away from all the other ones. California was settled very fast, and we will probably get into that on the next lecture we have. So, and then we had the idea of manifest destiny. And manifest destiny was the belief that America was chosen as the new promised land and that we were destined to control all of North America from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. And if you look at America today, we did that. Our biggest city is New York on the East Coast, and our second biggest city is Los Angeles on the West Coast. Here is a picture of Manifest Destiny that we talked about, and another picture. And here are all of the times that we purchased land, that we conquered land, and so on and so forth. A cession, Florida cession, Mexican cession, that means we conquered that area. They gave it to us because we physically took our army and physically went in and conquered that area from the people that owned it. So Florida we got from Spain, California, Nevada, Utah, parts of Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, we got from Mexico. Purchase is obviously we paid for it. So last week was dominated by the Louisiana Purchase and these two gentlemen, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. And we talked about the Corps of Discovery, how they went up the Mississippi River and then the Missouri River, and how they were helped by the Indian Sacagawea. There are several different ways of saying her name. Sacagawea, I've heard lots of them. All of them are correct. And they were also helped by their servant York. Sacagawea is second only to Pocahontas in famous Indians. And we looked at all these pictures. And there's a crazy person. And we looked at all the drawings. All right, so the frontier was settled by frontiersmen. These were mountain men, oftentimes the phrase is used, and the most famous of these was Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett, and Jim Bowie. Jim Bowie is the gentleman at the top here with the ginormous knife. Jim Bowie is famous for inventing the Bowie knife. Some of your dads may have a Bowie knife. I have a Bowie knife. It is a very large knife used for hunting and other things. Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett was very famous in our parents' and grandparents' time because there was a very popular Disney show about him. There have been shows and movies about him for all time. He is known for wrestling with bears. He ran away from home as a very young kid, went up into the mountains and lived by himself for a long time. And at the bottom right is Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone settled Kentucky during the Revolutionary War. He actually founded Lexington, Kentucky. I want all of you to research these individuals on your own. You can use Wikipedia for this. Go up and just go now and look up these three individuals. Go. I hope you did it. Pause the video and do it. Go. Are you doing it? Go do it. Go do it. Go do it. All right. So the next bit of land that we got after the Louisiana Purchase was Florida. We got Florida in 1819. Now, Florida was owned by Spain, but at this point in time, the Spanish Empire was a mere shadow of what it used to be. We talked about Spain a lot in October and November about how powerful Spain was, about how Spain basically owned everything south of Mexico and Texas, just all the way down. Almost all of South America was split between Spain and Portugal. But that was the 1500s. This is the 1800s. This is 300 years later. And their empire was corrupt, it was decaying, it was dying, and they didn't have the soldiers or the navy or the money to patrol most of their empire. So Florida was owned by Spain, but they didn't have any soldiers there. They didn't have any cities there. They didn't have any people there. And a lot of times, Indians who didn't like the United States, remember, after the Revolutionary War and after the War of 1812, the Indians will be constantly at war with the United States until the end of the 1800s. So Indians who didn't like America, particularly the Seminole tribe, criminals who were on the run for the law, escaped slaves, pirates, they were all using northern Florida as a base of operations to go into Georgia and to cause a lot of trouble, to steal, to burn down some houses, to plunder crops and food, just take whatever they wanted. And then they would go back into Florida, away from the United States Army. And the United States Army couldn't do anything about it because Florida was owned by Spain. Spain couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have an army there. So it was a mess. Now, Andrew Jackson, who you'll remember won the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson was super, super popular in the early 1800s. A lot of people looked at him as the new George Washington. In fact, his nickname was the American Lion. That's how people viewed George Washington, as this ferocious soldier that could just sweep America's enemies away. So Andrew Jackson was head of the army, and he took the army into Florida, invaded Florida, without the permission of the President of the United States. The President of the United States at this time was, of course, James Madison. And he completely destroyed them. I'm going to go back because it's a better picture, but I'll go back to the other one in a minute. So Andrew Jackson cornered all of these people, the Indians, the criminals, the escaped slaves, the pirates. They were all using a very, very large Spanish castle that the Spanish had built in the 1500s when they were conquering Spain. But the Spanish left, so the Indians, the criminals, the escaped slaves, the pirates, they moved into this castle. Now, they went into the castle thinking that Andrew Jackson and the army couldn't get them when they were in the castle. But Andrew Jackson had cannons. And by stroke of luck, one of these cannons went over the walls of the castle, into the middle of the castle, into what's called the powder room. Now, the powder room was the most secure room in the castle because that is where the gunpowder is kept. And I don't know if you know anything about gunpowder, but it explodes. And the entire castle exploded. This was one of those explosions that you could see from space. The entire place just went up. And Andrew Jackson completely destroyed them. Afterwards, let's see, John Quincy Adams became president of the United States. That is John Adams' son. And the United States told Spain that if they didn't give up Florida to them willingly, Jackson would just continue conquering Florida all the way down to the Florida Keys, and it wouldn't be a problem anyway. So Spain willingly gave us Florida. They weren't doing anything with it anyway, but we did kind of conquer Florida from Spain, even though we weren't fighting Spanish soldiers. Florida didn't mean that much to Spain anyway. There was a lot of speculation from the Spanish. The reason they wanted the Spanish wanted Florida anyway is because they thought the Fountain of Youth was in Florida. Now, the Fountain of Youth was a myth that if you would continue to drink from this fountain, that all your diseases would be cured, all your wounds would be cured, and you would live forever. But the catch is you had to keep drinking from the fountain. Now, they never found it. It doesn't exist, but that's why they wanted it in the first place. The Florida secession is called the Adams-Onis Treaty. And so now we have Florida. And on the map, we can see that everything above the red line is owned by either the United States or Canada, way up here, and everything below the red line is owned by Spain. This is This is now the treaty. The Oregon country right here was claimed by both the United States and the British Empire. We will end up splitting that area with them. All right, so now I'm going to talk about Andrew Jackson. Here is Andrew Jackson. And here is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is the president on the $20 bill. So Andrew Jackson was the 7th president of the United States. His presidency was from 1829 to 1837. And Andrew Jackson is known for founding the Democratic Party. The modern Democratic Party was founded by Andrew Jackson. He is also known for the president that instigated the Trail of Tears debacle. He was also a certified bad A. He fought in over 100 duels, was shot 3 times, and survived an assassination attempt. If you don't remember what duels were, we talked about duels when we talked about Alexander Hamilton. Duels were an archaic institution. They are illegal now. They were illegal back then too, but that didn't stop Andrew Jackson. If somebody insulted you, you could challenge him to a duel, and then you would stand on one side of the field, the other person would stand on the other side of the field, and then you would shoot at each other in point blank range. This was a duel. Andrew Jackson fought in over 100 of those. Now, the pistols, the shooting, that was the most common part of the duel. There were other duels that were sword fights. So you could challenge somebody to a duel, say that person said something about your mama, and you should say, I can challenge you to a duel, and then you could kill him with a sword. This is illegal now. We can't do duels. Duels are silly. No duels. No duels. The other thing Jackson is known for doing was destroying the bank, and that was his most proudest accomplishment. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. The reason the Democratic Party is known as, or their symbol, their mascot is a donkey, is because the presidency of Andrew Jackson was known as being very stubborn. He was a very stubborn person. Mules, donkeys are very stubborn, so that is why he has a donkey as his symbol. Now, this was not a good thing that happened. The Trail of Tears, officially known as the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forced all Indians living in the southern states to move west of the Mississippi River. Andrew Jackson really didn't like Indians. He spent most of his career in the army fighting Indians. Most of the soldiers that he fought in Florida were Indian soldiers. And on this journey, over 4,000 Cherokees died. American soldiers were told to just go round up the Indians and make sure they moved west of the Mississippi River. This was not a good thing that happened. This was a stain on the history of our nation. Now, the other thing that Andrew Jackson did was he destroyed the bank, the Federal Bank of America. This is not the same Bank of America that exists today, nor is it the same as the Federal Reserve that exists today, which is our current bank. There was a Bank of America that controlled all economic happenings in the United States. This was not a democratic institution, and it was against the Constitution. These people were controlling how much money was in how much money there was. So maybe there was a deficit of money. They could print more money and cause inflation, which means your money isn't worth anything. This $20 bill would be worth $10, as in something that costs $20 today could cost $40 tomorrow. The bank appointed its own members, which means they weren't democratically elected, which is all our country is about. And Jackson took them apart and gave the economic power back to Congress, back to the Senate. And this is why he's known as a good president. The Trail of Tears is a bad thing. In fact, we're going to watch a little cartoon.
Texan, you are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out. By the eternal God, I will rout you out. After surviving an assassination attempt, Jackson finally defeated the bank in 1836. When asked what was the greatest accomplishment in his life, Old Hickory replied, "I killed the bank." And those were his last words.
So that was funny and a bit graphic. I hope you enjoyed it. We're now going to move on to Texas. The Texas Revolution and the Mexican-American War. Those were the third big war that we fought. We have the American Revolution, we have the War of 1812, and then we have the war with Texas. So here is a map of the United States around the year 1821. We can see the United States of America is in green. The British Empire up here is in red, what is today Canada. And in orange, we have Mexico. Now, on the last map I showed you, I said it was Spain. Well, Mexico had its own Revolutionary War against Spain, a lot like our Revolutionary War against the British Empire, and won its freedom. So now we have the United States and we have Mexico. Texas is this little area right here. Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821. And Mexico did something kind of dirty. Mexico started saying, hey, Americans, why don't you come over to Texas, which is the northern area of Mexico, and why don't you live here? And if you fight the Indians, these would be the Comanche Indians, if you fight these Indians and help populate Texas, then you can have it. You can have any land that you want in Texas as long as you help us fight the Indians. Well, this seems like a really good deal. Texas is a very fertile place, and we didn't know it at the time, but Texas also has a lot of oil. That would be the thing that makes gasoline, and it has made lots and lots of people rich. So this was a really good deal. However, the deal got worse because Mexico, this was after all the Americans had moved into Texas. After that, they then said, Americans, if you want to stay in Mexico, number one, you all have to learn how to speak Spanish. We're not speaking English anymore. This is Mexico. If you want to speak English, go back to America. If you want to speak Spanish, or if you want to live in Texas, you have to speak Spanish. Now that's bad enough. The second thing they did was they said you all have to convert to Catholicism. If you remember way back in September when we were talking about this starts wars. To tell somebody that you don't like their religion and that they have to be your religion. Number one, it's wrong. Number two, they're not going to like you. And that is exactly what happened in Texas. This did not go over very well. So Texas, this area right here, decided to declare its independence from Mexico. The same way that the United States declared its independence from the British Empire, the same way Mexico declared its independence from the Spanish Empire, Texas declared its independence from Mexico. And this man in the hat, I put this picture up because of the hat. Man, I love his hat. That is a nice hat. I love that hat. The cane, I could keep it or leave it. Doesn't matter. But that hat, man, his name is Sam Houston. Houston, Texas is where we get his name. Sam Houston was a Virginian. That means he's from Virginia. He moved to Texas and he was elected president and general of the brand new Army of Texas. And that Army of Texas was about to make somebody very mad. And that somebody was this guy. That guy looks like a peacock. This guy was Santa Anna. Santa Anna was president and general of Mexico. Now, Santa Anna had a force of several thousand people. Santa Anna is the person who defeated the Spanish Empire. Santa Anna would be the equivalent of George Washington if he was in the United States. He's the guy that got their independence. So Santa Anna was coming north to reconquer Texas. And Houston ordered that Santa Anna's army be stopped. Sam Houston needed a bigger army. He needed some way to slow Santa Anna down while he was making an army. Armies can't just be made. You have to conscript people or have them volunteer, and then you have to spend several months training the people. They have to know how to march. They have to know how to shoot. They have to know how to take orders, because if not, it's just an unruly mob. And an army, especially one that beat the Spanish Empire, will always destroy a mob. So he wanted the Texan forces to gather at the Alamo. The Alamo is a very famous place in America. I'm certain all of you have heard of it, even if you don't know exactly what it is. It is a church that was turned into a fortress in San Antonio, Texas, about 100 miles from the current Texas-Mexican border. And the Texas forces at the Alamo were led by Colonel William Travis and two of the three most famous mountain men of all time, Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie. Here is the Alamo. This is it today. The only thing that still exists today is this church, is the church portion of the fort. Here is a reconstruction of what the fort would have looked like around 2004, 2005. They made a movie of the Alamo, and this is a reconstruction that they used for the making of the movie. But we can see, we've looked at lots of forts in this class, and we can see that this is not a great fort. Its walls are only 1 story tall. There's no star pattern. There's no pattern really at all. Some of the gates are just wicker fence. This is not a great fort. But this is where the Texans decided to make their last stand. Now, there were only 187 Texans. Santa Anna, General Mexico, had 4,000 Mexican soldiers. So there was 187 versus 4,000. You can probably guess who won. Yeah, the Mexicans won. 17 of those soldiers were from Virginia. Now, Colonel Travis knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew he didn't have a chance to win. And he said, "You may never see your loved ones again. Those who want to can leave now. Those who will fight, stay with me. Now, Travis fought Santa Anna for 13 days, almost 2 weeks. 187 Texans held out against 4,000 Mexican soldiers. Travis wrote a letter hoping for reinforcements. There is the timer. I'm going to read this and then let you go. To all the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours. That means the Mexicans are constantly firing cannons at him. 24 hours straight they were firing these cannons and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion, otherwise the garrison are to be put to the sword. That means the Mexicans are planning on killing them all. The fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. Victory or death. If you recall, in history, the phrase was liberty or death. Travis has changed it to victory or death. William Barrett Travis. I'm going to leave you with these that I want you to look up and watch. And I hope you have a good day. And I won't see you, but you'll see me next time. Have a good day.